Emma's tractor died in the middle of the field. No warning, no sputter, just a sudden cough and silence. The machine that carried her through 12-hour harvest days now sat still under the afternoon sun. She wiped the sweat from her brow, muttered under her breath, and pulled out her phone. The mechanic's voice was flat. "Earliest I can come? 10 days. 10 days might as well have been a year. By then, her crop would be gone, ruined before it ever reached market." She hung up, gripping the phone so hard her knuckles turned white. She was calculating the loss in her head when she saw it, an old van slowing on the dusty road that ran alongside her property. It was dented, paint faded, tires kicking up a small cloud of dirt. The driver, a man she didn't recognize, leaned out and motioned for her to come over. No smile. No words. Just a simple gesture. Emma hesitated. She had no reason to trust strangers. But standing in that field, with the sun dropping lower and the weight of an entire harvest slipping away, curiosity overrode caution. She walked toward the van, boots crunching over dry soil. The man's eyes were sharp, scanning her like he was assessing more than just her presence. "You're stuck," he said, not as a question. His voice was calm, deliberate. He glanced at the lifeless tractor, then back at her. "I can help you. But not in the way you think." Before Emma could respond, he opened the passenger door. Inside, she glimpsed something unexpected: stacks of flattened cardboard boxes, a set of scales, and several sealed jars of what looked like preserves. Not the tools of a mechanic. "What's in it for you?" she asked, keeping her voice guarded. The man's expression didn't change. "Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Depends on whether you're willing to try something new before the sun goes down." Her heartbeat quickened. She didn't know if she was walking into a solution or a mistake, but with every minute that passed, the harvest was slipping further from her hands. She took one last look at her dead tractor, then climbed into the van. The door slammed shut. Dust rose. And without another word, the man steered the van toward the far end of the property, where Emma rarely went. She didn't yet know that this drive, on this day, would set in motion a chain of events that no one in her small town would see coming. The van rattled along a narrow dirt path Emma had only seen from a distance. Overgrown weeds brushed against the doors, scratching metal as the man drove deeper into the far edge of her property. The fields here were wilder, less cultivated, places she'd never bothered with because the soil was poor and the terrain uneven. She finally spoke. "Where are we going?" The man kept his eyes forward. "Somewhere you've been ignoring." His words were clipped, like each one had been measured before leaving his mouth. Emma glanced at the jars on the floor, catching the faint smell of something sweet and tangy. It was oddly comforting in this tense moment, but she didn't dare ask about them. The van took a sharp turn and stopped in front of an old shed she'd completely forgotten about. It belonged to her grandfather decades ago, before it was swallowed by weeds. The man stepped out, moving with purpose. He pulled open the rusty door, revealing stacks of wooden crates and burlap sacks covered in dust. Emma's voice was skeptical. "And this is supposed to save my harvest?" He ignored the comment, picked up a crate, and set it at her feet. Inside were oddly shaped ears of corn, smaller, with deep golden kernels unlike anything she grew. "Your grandfather planted these once," he said. "He didn't see the value. But the market's different now." She frowned. "I can't sell a few crates of old corn and make up for a whole field." The man smiled faintly for the first time. "It's not about selling the corn. It's about what you do with it." Before she could press him, he reached into the van and grabbed one of the jars she'd noticed earlier. He unscrewed the lid, letting a strong, rich aroma spill into the air. It smelled like a mix of roasted grain and something faintly sweet. "This," he said, holding it out to her, "is worth more per pound than your entire harvest combined." Emma took the jar, feeling the weight of it in her hands. The mixture inside looked almost like ground coffee but with a warmer hue. "What is it?" she asked. "That," he replied, "is your second chance." Her mind spun with questions. Why was this stranger on her property? How did he know about the old shed? What exactly was in the jar? And most importantly, how could any of this replace the thousands of dollars she was about to lose? The man closed the shed door and handed her the crate of golden corn. "If you're in, meet me here tomorrow at sunrise. If not, forget we ever spoke." Then he climbed back into the van and drove off, leaving her standing in the tall grass with a jar in her hand, a crate at her feet, and a dozen questions that wouldn't let her sleep that night. She didn't yet realize that by showing up tomorrow, she wouldn't just be trying to save her farm, she'd be stepping into something far bigger than she imagined. The alarm ripped her from a restless sleep. She had barely closed her eyes, replaying the man's words and the image of that jar over and over in her head. By 5:30 a.m., the sky was still a dull gray, but Emma was already driving her pickup toward the far end of the property. The old shed stood in the same half-forgotten corner, wrapped in morning mist. The man's van was already there. Its back doors were open, revealing more jars stacked neatly alongside sacks of that golden corn. He was grinding something in a hand-crank mill, his motions slow and deliberate. Without greeting her, he slid a burlap sack toward her boots. "Start with this." She crouched down, pulling the drawstring open. The kernels inside were warm in color, almost glowing in the dim light. "You're going to have to tell me what exactly I'm doing," she said. "You'll figure it out," he replied. "It's easier to learn by doing than by talking." He handed her a second, smaller grinder and nodded toward the sack. Reluctantly, she poured a handful of kernels into the top and began turning the handle. The resistance was strong, the grinding loud. Slowly, a fine, fragrant powder fell into a bowl beneath the grinder. The scent hit her instantly, rich, nutty, with a sweetness she couldn't place. She glanced at him. "This smells incredible." "That's why people will pay for it," he said simply. For the next hour, they worked in silence, the sound of grinding filling the shed. Her arms burned from the effort, but a strange sense of focus settled over her. Each turn of the handle felt like a small act of defiance against the disaster waiting in her field. When they finally stopped, he placed the bowl of fresh powder next to a row of empty jars. Packaging matters. People don't just buy taste, they buy the story. He slid a plain label across the table. It was simple, handwritten, Heritage Gold. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Catchy. Whose idea?" "Yours," he said, without looking at her. She frowned. "I never." "You will," he interrupted. "By the time this is over, that name will mean something." She wanted to demand answers, who he was, why he was here, and what made him so certain about any of this, but before she could, he pushed a stack of jars toward her. "We're going into town." She hesitated. "With these?" He smiled faintly. "Let's see if anyone's ready to believe in Heritage Gold." They loaded the jars into the van, the weight of them heavier than their size suggested. As they drove toward town, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a market trip, that she was being pulled into a plan much larger than her. And she still didn't know if she wanted to be. The van rolled into town just as the morning market was coming to life. Stalls were opening, the air was thick with the smell of fresh bread and brewed coffee, and the usual chatter of vendors carried over the narrow streets. Emma kept glancing at the crates of jars in the back, wondering what they were really worth, or if they were worth anything at all. The man parked in front of a small bakery with a faded sign. Without a word, he grabbed a jar, walked inside, and motioned for her to follow. The bell above the door chimed, and the warmth of freshly baked goods washed over her. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged woman dusted with flour. She looked up, curiosity flickering in her eyes as the man set the jar on the counter. "Taste this," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Emma stood awkwardly, watching as the baker opened the jar and took a deep inhale. Her eyebrows lifted. Smells different. Grind it, brew it like coffee, the man instructed. While the baker worked, Emma studied the place, empty shelves waiting to be stocked, a chalkboard menu with prices hastily erased, a "Help Wanted" sign in the corner. This wasn't a bustling bakery, it was struggling. The woman poured the steaming liquid into 3 small cups. She took the first sip, then paused. Her expression shifted from curiosity to surprise. "What is this?" "Heritage Gold," the man said. "Locally grown. Limited supply. You get the first offer." The baker took another sip, slower this time. "How much?" "50 a pound," he said without hesitation. Emma nearly choked. That was more than triple what she could ever get for her best produce. Surely this was a joke. But the baker didn't flinch. She set down her cup, glanced toward the empty shelves, and said, "I'll take 20 pounds. Emma stared at her, the number ringing in her ears. 20 pounds. At 50 each. In one deal, more money than she'd made from an entire week at the farmer's market. As they left the bakery with the first payment in hand, Emma couldn't keep quiet anymore. "You need to tell me what's going on. Why is she paying that much? What's in this stuff?" The man kept his eyes on the road. "It's not about what's in it, it's about what people believe is in it. And you can't sell belief without a story." Emma looked at him, frustrated. "And whose story is it?" He glanced at her briefly. "Yours. If you're willing to tell it." They drove in silence, the envelope of cash resting between them. She wanted answers, but all she had now were more questions. By the next weekend, Emma was back at the shed grinding corn before sunrise. Orders had doubled after the bakery posted about Heritage Gold on social media. Strangers were tagging friends, posting photos of steaming cups, calling it the drink you didn't know you needed. It should have felt like victory. Instead, a knot of unease sat in her stomach. Success this fast didn't feel real, and she had no idea what would happen if it stopped. That morning, as she loaded jars into her truck, she noticed a black pickup parked across the dirt road. 2 men sat inside, watching. They didn't wave. When she moved toward them, the truck pulled away slowly, leaving only a trail of dust. In town, it became clear the story had spread further than she realized. At the farmer's market, a rival grower named Vince, a man with deep pockets and a reputation for undercutting competition, leaned against her truck. "Heard you've got something special," he said, eyeing the crates. "Mind if I take a look?" "I do mind," Emma replied, keeping her voice even. He smirked. "Relax. Just curious. Folks say you're selling corn for coffee prices. That's bold." He tapped the side of the truck, then leaned closer. "Bold can get you noticed. Not always by the right people." Before she could respond, the man from the van appeared behind Vince. His presence changed the air instantly. Vince stepped back, muttered something under his breath, and walked away. Emma turned to him. "Who exactly are you?" He ignored the question. "We're not selling here today. Too exposed. Come with me." They drove to a small restaurant on the edge of town, where the owner greeted the man like an old friend. Within minutes, another sale was made, larger than the first. As they left, Emma's phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Stop selling." That was all the message said. No name. No context. Emma showed it to him. He scanned the screen, his face unreadable. Ignore it. People get nervous when they can't control something new. But as they drove back toward her farm, Emma couldn't shake the image of the black pickup and the men watching her shed. She was starting to realize this wasn't just a business experiment. It was a game she didn't know the rules of, one where making the wrong move could cost her far more than money. 2 days later, Emma woke to the sound of her dog barking frantically. She threw on her boots and ran outside. The shed door was swinging open, its padlock snapped clean off. Inside, 3 sacks of corn were gone. The grinders were still there, but one had been knocked over, its handle bent. She stood in the doorway, heart pounding, trying to process what she was looking at. The man's van pulled up minutes later. He stepped inside, scanned the damage, and cursed under his breath. "This isn't random." "You think it's Vince?" she asked. "Could be. Could be someone he's working for. Either way, this is pressure. They want you to back off." Emma felt anger rise. "And if I don't?" He looked at her squarely. "Then they raise the stakes." By noon, she was at the police station, but the officer barely took notes. "No proof, no cameras, nothing we can do," he said, handing her a card for security recommendations. On her way home, she spotted the black pickup again, parked near the turnoff to her land. This time she didn't look away. She slowed, met the driver's eyes through the glass, and kept driving. When she reached the farm, the man was waiting by the shed. On the workbench lay a small metal box. "What's that?" she asked. "Insurance," he said. "GPS trackers. We're putting them in every shipment." They worked silently, embedding the trackers under jar lids and inside burlap sacks. It felt absurd, almost paranoid, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. By evening, they had filled the van again. As they were locking up, headlights swept across the yard. The black pickup rolled slowly past the gate, then disappeared into the dark. The man watched it go. "They're testing you. Trying to see how far you'll bend before you break." Emma swallowed hard. She'd never been one to quit, but she'd also never had to defend something she didn't fully understand. And the worst part was, she still didn't know why heritage gold was worth stealing, or what she'd gotten herself into. Emma didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at a half-empty mug of coffee gone cold, the words of Vince replaying in her head. "Not just money you should be worried about." At 4 a.m., she called the man. "I'm not walking away." There was silence on the other end, then a slow exhale. "Then we hit them where it hurts." The plan was risky, stupid risky, but it was the only way to pull heritage gold out of Vince's hands and back into hers. The man had contacts in regional markets, small distributors who could move product fast if they got it first. If Emma could flood the market before Vince locked in his investors, his whole pitch would collapse. But that meant producing more than she'd ever handled in a week, and doing it under the radar. By noon, she'd called in every favor she had. Neighboring farmers loaned her spare grinders, her cousin brought over 3 extra hands, and even the mechanic who'd blown her off weeks ago showed up with a repaired auger. For 3 straight days, the shed became a blur of motion, corn pouring into hoppers, jars clinking onto pallets, burlap sacks stacked shoulder high. The air was thick with dust and the sharp, sweet smell of roasted grain. On the 4th night, as they were loading the last van, Emma heard tires crunching on the gravel outside. Her stomach tightened. The black pickup. It idled just past the gate, headlights washing over the yard. A figure stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, face in shadow. He walked slowly to the fence and leaned on it. "Long hours for a small farm," he called. Emma didn't answer. The man from the van came up beside her, hands in his pockets. "We're closed," he said flatly. The stranger smiled faintly. "Not for long." He turned, climbed back into the pickup, and drove off without another word. They finished loading in silence. The next morning, Emma and the man split the shipments, each taking a different route to hit every distributor they could. It was exhausting, frantic work, but by nightfall, most of the stock was gone, sold under her name. When Emma finally returned to the farm, her phone buzzed. A single text from an unknown number. "You've made a mistake." No threats. No demands. Just the cold certainty of someone who believed they'd already won. Emma sat on the porch, phone in hand, watching the last light fade over the fields. She told herself they were wrong. She told herself she'd taken back control. But deep down, she knew the fight had only just started. 2 days after the big push, Emma's phone rang at 6:17 a.m. The man's voice was sharp, urgent. "They moved on the warehouse. Vince is out." She sat up in bed. "Out? What do you mean?" "He's been bought out. Someone bigger stepped in. We're not fighting Vince anymore, we're fighting the ones who were using him." Emma's stomach sank. She'd thought she'd finally gotten the upper hand, but now the board had changed completely. An hour later, they were parked outside a glass-fronted building in the city. Inside, behind a reception desk that looked more like an art installation than furniture, a woman in a gray suit greeted them by name. No introduction needed, she knew who they were. "We've been expecting you," she said. They were led into a sleek conference room. On the table sat a single jar of heritage gold, perfectly lit as if it were a museum piece. A man in his 50s, hair silver but eyes razor-sharp, entered and took the head seat. "Miss Carter," he said, "you've created something remarkable. The strain you grow, it's unique. High yield, drought-resistant, and with a nutrient profile no other corn on the market can match. We've tested it." Emma blinked. "You tested it?" He smiled. "We have a research division. Vince was sloppy, but he found you first. We were prepared to work through him, but you've proven more resilient." The man leaned forward. "We want exclusive rights. Global distribution. You'll be wealthy beyond anything you've imagined." Emma's mind raced. The offer was staggering. But the man's tone left no room for doubt. This wasn't a negotiation. "And if I say no?" she asked. His smile faded. "Then we'll acquire it another way. You've seen what happens when we apply pressure." The room fell silent. Emma could hear her own heartbeat. This was it, the moment to choose between control and security, between risking everything for independence or selling out to protect what she had. The man slid a contract across the table. The paper was thick, the pen heavy in her hand. Emma looked at the jar in the center of the table, at the golden kernels inside. She remembered the first day the tractor broke down, the dust in the air, the stranger in the van. She remembered every sleepless night, every stolen sack, every warning. And she still didn't move the pen. The man's eyes narrowed. "Think carefully, Miss Carter. You're not the first to be given this choice. But you might be the last to walk away from it."